Hi, everybody. Uh, yeah, you'll see that in God We Trust, you will see that pink dash in here and there. It's the feminine presence. Okay, let's see now. This is the book that Dan referred to that's going to be published by the Feminist Press. And whatever is contained must get released. You will see that came as a metaphor in one of the process series. But right now, women, the law, Judaism, there's a lot that's contained that must get released. My Jewish Orthodox girlhood, my life as a feminist artist, intertwined. Right now, there's a show called A Complex Weave, Feminism and Identity. That's my work is in there, and there are women artists of all nationalities and how complex it is, their identity, how it mixes in with the work. Okay, let's see. I'll start with this picture. My mother is the middle girl there, standing up at age 15. Hinda, my grandmother, is sitting. And this was on the east side before they moved to Borough Park, where I was born and raised until my marriage. Here's my father's graduation picture. Recently, I put it into Bridges. You'll see the pink dash, it's vertical here. It shows that women's presence is not there, but my father is he's the middle, handsome guy, all the way on the right. Baba, my grandmother, sitting at the kitchen table. Baba used to say to me, she only spoke Yiddish, she'd say to me, Hindele Welt, from the time I was 14, Hindele Weltman a Talmid Chacham. Helene will take a scholar, a Talmudic scholar, in marriage. Fast forward to 1973. That's when I came to California. That's when I looked out and I wanted to make works that did not have my own markings, but something that would tell me something. Rather than my making a mark, I felt that abstract art was getting extremely, how shall I say, after Rothko, it was not necessary, it was too arbitrary for me. And so by pouring, I saw that the universal morphology of branches and roots and like veins and capillaries just coagulate. It's a natural thing. It's the handwriting of the universe. And then I wanted to see what would happen with paintings that would change in time. This is Drifting Boundaries, are shown at the Oakland Museum and Project Artaud. Here's what happened. It filled in over the years, and still that the wrinkles in the paper still have that morphology I spoke of. There was a whole series of pourings, and what the formation was an oval form, not a triangle, not a square or a rectangle. And to me, it was like the nucleus shape, the primordial shape. And again, within it, it had that other morphology in its texture. And it would change. It's getting darker. Here I am in Berkeley, 1975. No, yes, that was 78. Because I had the panels on the floor of the studio, and I'm touching the skin because the panel will be lifted and the wet oil beneath will come cascading down and get caught in its own sac. I didn't know then that for the next 10 years I would be dealing with other sacs. This is the liquid sacs of the 70s. It's going to burst. It was very much about the body and the body of the land. Here's another sac. It might drizzle down. It's sweating. It might gush out. I named them for the way they spread and the way they broke. Okay, that was up to 79 when I showed them at White Columns, New York. And then when I came back from New York, I knew that I wanted to not be that metaphoric. It was the time that I heard Helen Caldecott, and she said, wherever you are in your life, think about what you can do for disarmament. And Eisen, pretty abstract painter, wondered what I could do. I went to the land. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And in fact, this was the first. You'll see it says 1980 and 2005. It took me 25 years to know why I did that. I never showed it until 2005. This is when I saw myself as an ecofeminist. I saw the land. It was the time that Joanna Macy wrote that book, Earth as Lover. Susan Griffin wrote Women in Nature. And I was very influenced by this, and I was sort of looking for my foremothers, as it were. You might see a little tiny figure there in this vista. And there were many vistas like that, looking, groveling, crouching down, thinking, where are they? Where are my foremothers? Somehow I felt the land could tell me something. Here's another one. I wandered near echoing caves. And then hold that in your minds because I'm coming back to that and to show you what happened in 2005. Here's the sac. The liquid sac became the iconic sac and the pillowcase of the 80s. This was in the Women's Building in San Francisco, sand carrying sand sacks in the Women's Building in 1981. And Anna Halprin and Pauline Oliveros were, Anna led out, well, the whole auditorium was carpeted with 5-foot squares of muslin, and on top of that, it was like an indoor beach. And the women were sitting in the sand, and then like a beach. And then Anna said, "Find the corners of the muslin, and let's walk out. Let's take it out like an exodus." When I saw that, at least in California, there was so much enthusiasm. I thought, hey, I should try this with women from warring nations. And these are the stone sacks. Of course, I went to Israel first with Arabic and Jewish women. You won't see this story in any newspaper, but women, Arabic and Jewish women carried stones in 1981. And then the sack became the pillowcase, and the first place I went to was Livermore Weapons Laboratory, rescuing the earth, as it were, in a pillowcase. And then writing in a little blurb in Helen Caldicott's Women's Party for Survival. And I just said that I'm going to go across the country. I'm going to stop at SAC bases, SAC, Strategic Air Command, and we're going to rescue the Earth in our pillowcase sacks. And here's the Earth ambulance that was just, borrowed from a truck and made to sort of look like an ambulance. And then we had a van, and we went, and we got this encouragement from Four Corners, Native American women. And this is the poster was made of cloth. It was all these sacks saying that Destination UN 1982, mass rally for disarmament. And it was like a talus. It was, when we dug the earth, it didn't matter if you wore just like a talus, looks like a prayer shawl, whether you're wearing silk or whether you're wearing denim. It doesn't matter. The talus covers. Here it is. This was near Indian Point. I'm in the middle there. And then finally at the UN, and that's at Ralph Bunche Park, where the Isaiah Wall, we took old stretchers from old wars and walked down those steps by the Isaiah Wall and into the frames, which were like the frames for the paintings that change in time. It was like a geological map of America with all the different colors of this land. And then the pillowcases were emptied and hung up just at Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza between 1st and 2nd Avenue. Well, 10 years later, in 1992, Creative Time asked me to do this piece under the Brooklyn Bridge, and I said, I can't do that. I can't go back. The earth may be contaminated, who knows, after 10 years. They said, well, do something. Here's a commission. So I bought myself an ambulance. There's an ambulance. Now I had a real one. It looked like a cathedral. This is in the next year in Seneca Army Depot, where we just hung up the pillowcases, and the guys who were just surveilling, they just stood there. Grace Paley was there with Dr. Spock and others, and Grace decided to wear a pillowcase. And I, actually I asked the women to write their dreams and nightmares about nuclear war. Grace wrote what she wanted to write and wore it, and I felt, wait a minute, am I going to be a control freak and just have this minimal art like that long line at the UN, which was so aesthetic? No, I'll go with this. So that's Grace. And then when I came back in 1984 to San Francisco, there was altogether 7 Earth ambulances, and this was another one. We went to the Moscone Democratic Convention, and it was like a Magritte. I wanted to make one huge commemorative sack that would symbolize it all. And here it is, but it failed because we wanted to put it at the door of all the delegates, and we couldn't carry it. It was just too heavy. Earth is a very heavy thing. And around 1989, I thought, well, I am an artist. I should package it into an art modality. So I took the stretchers and I whitewashed all the bloodstains. There were bloodstains on there. And I called it stretched canvas. This is shown at PS1 Museum. Other stretchers were there for people to lie on to see how it felt. And then I sort of dismantled the military, as it were, and took out the poles and took out the, made a weaving of the straps that the poor soldiers lie in. And that was called unstretched canvas. Okay, fast forward to 1995, all the pillowcases got shown at the Berkeley Art Museum, covering the facade, all the dreams moving in the wind. They also had been at Knoxville Art Museum and also at American University later on in 2006, because even though I'm sort of over a certain series in a way, I keep going back to it because the issues are never resolved. It's not like, oh, now we don't have a problem with disarmament. Here's Fort Mason, where I just cut up the shape of, it's like a shaped canvas, the actual sack. It can't float anymore. And it's a mourning piece, 2 sacks in mourning. It comes out of the Jewish idea of making a strip in mourning. And then at 1995, at the same time, Art Matters in New York showed on the Sony Jumbotron my work in Japan, which was, I had the 2 sacks en route to Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the waters, and then that was sort of floating right above Times Square while everybody was running around with their attache cases, and then the words were, what would you take? What would you carry in your sack? All right, now, fast forward, 1990. I did not want to think this, but after dealing with the military, I had to confess to myself that the blueprint is very much in the Old Testament. And I felt I must do something about that, and that's when I began, in 1990, the liberation of God. I began the liberation of God, searching in the 5 books of Moses for the sections where God has been spoken for. I look into the passages where patriarchal attitudes have been projected unto God, as though man has a right to have dominion even over God. I glue transparent parchment onto each page so that the parchment buckles, making the words cloud up, then clear, while the viewer is inclined to press the page down to read the text more easily. And then at the end I'm saying, I ask, when will God be rescued from ungodly projections in order to be God, whatever that is? So here's the highlighting. Here's the 54 books the 54 chapters, 1 chapter in each book. This was at the Jewish Museum, and it went to 5 other museums. The video of my hand highlighting on both sides. And then the image of the 10 Commandments. They're not graven in stone, they're air. You could walk right through. Well, I was very afraid to do all this, I must tell you. And there's a rabbi in New York, Rabbi Rolando Matalan, who encouraged me. He said, hey, for Shavuot, the holiday where we stay overnight to learn, he said, bring your highlighted text. Let's learn from there. And so I did, and congregants came up, learned from that, sat down, and in another 20 minutes, others came up. My mother, meanwhile, somebody took this picture when she wasn't aware of this, a guest of ours. But anyway, my mother said to me, what do you need this for? Why are you doing this? Why? And she kept begging me, like, just not to do this. And I said, you know, Mom, there are book commentary books in the shows. Why don't you just write it down? Dear Helene, there are good teachings in the Torah. Why are they not acknowledged in your piece? I would have felt better if you did mention the question, the greatness of the teachings, Mom. To this day, you know, for some reason, my mother was very blind, and that's why I started my whole memoir, because I was reading these stories to her. I was writing them as stories of girlhood in Borough Park. And she had a black marker, and she did this took up the whole page. Other people had little tiny offerings. And so everybody finds that the first thing they open the book, for some reason, it comes to her comment. Well, anyway, after I started highlighting with other materials. So these are lens pieces. It's sort of like a Cornell little box. And then I'm highlighting certain words, like you'll see words that just come out at you: abomination, death, blood, impurity, unclean. They just come out. The second, so the God Project is 20 years. Now is the anniversary, of the 20th year. And it's called the God Project, 9 Houses Without Women. So in Hebrew, house is bayit, or beit, the house of. So the first one was the Beit Midrash. That was the liberation of God. The second is Beit Knesset. This was the women's section, where I had a long table that signified my grandmothers, my babas, who sat in the shtibel in the back. Actually, just to tell you one more thing about them, in my proclamation, where I list a lot of my anguish, I say, what would my babas really say? Because you see, the page is highlighted, and their images are underneath, and it's on a mylar table, so it's sort of a reflection of their faces underneath. What will they really have thought? Would they have said, I wrote, would they have put their palms on my cheek and said, Hindela maturnished? Or would they, you mustn't, or would they have said, Galeitzagat, schön Zeit. Thanks be to God, it's about time. And then the next installation was Beit Sefer, which is the house of the school. And there I was, there are all the blank notebooks, totally devoid of any comment ever by a woman, although I had women teachers. And they're all through the parochial school and high school. Here's an image of the blank notebooks furled together like a broken column. And around were the blackboards where I just say, no women's commentary, no mashal example to cite her, no to memorize. The page is blank. I'll never know their yosher, their judgments, their chachma, their brilliance, their yirat shamayim, their fear of the heavens. I want to know that. I want to know that, and it's not here. It's not here. That's why today we're talking about women's voices. It's a tragedy. Okay, then comes my mother and I. It's going to be another installation. We're sitting on a pew. And in front of the pew is the book that will not close. Robin Morgan she really influenced me. She said, Helene, you think that by highlighting that the other parts are going to be okay? She said, there's a patriarchal thread that's running through no matter what. And I said, I'm not going to highlight. I'm going to just cover every page, so you can't open the book and you can't close it, but it will be a sacred object. And then and then I'm writing in back of the pew. I have this proclamation. I sit with my mother for the last hour Ne'ilah. That's the last prayer at Yom Kippur. When it is inscribed, who shall rise and who shall fall, who shall live and who shall die. I was born from this mother, and she, Etta, was born from Hinda, and Hinda has died, and Etta's turn is next. Can I say this? And my turn is next. I must face the certainties. There are only two certainties, says a midrash, only two. From a mother aim means mother, we began. As a dead person, mate, we will end. That's the emet, that's the truth. So I guess it was okay to sit like a radical feminist daughter and an ultra-Orthodox mother on the pew. And, I mean, as it were. And I say, I try again. I say, look, I say, Mom, the words do show through the overlay, but take the last chapters, the blessing and the curse. You see the blessing, and can we read this so I can explain? And to my query, she answers, Helene, I'm a plain woman, plain person. So that's how it was. All right, getting more personal, my clean days. And 24 feet of my entire marriage. And here are the menstrual days have gauze over it, and 5 days, and then 7 clean days. And what I'm saying, believe it or not, is I think it's a pretty okay thing, the mikvah and all of that. But nobody says that in Leviticus, it never tells a woman to bathe. It says the man should bathe if he touches her or touches her chair or something like that. And so I think it was co-opted by somebody who did not bleed. Here's my marriage bed with a rhythmic video projection of each month. I say 5 days, 7 days, ritual bath, 5 days, 7 days, and it turns. The next month goes on the bed. Here is my marriage contract. All of this was part of a whole, my bridal chamber. My marriage contract, I'm holding up my own chuppah, my own canopy, and I put a photograph of the gravestone of my husband, and there's a pink line, one of those pink lines again. You know why? Because it says, Menachem Mendel, son of Aryeh Lev, and his mother is left out. And the ketuvah on the wall here, my marriage contract, guess what? It says, Helene Greenfield, virgin daughter of Anshel. It doesn't say anything about my mother on the ketuvah. Here's one thing I never showed, but it's part of it. I just did it later on. Like I said, sometimes I go back and do other pieces, even though I'm supposedly finished with certain things. I decided that I have to go into the Talmud, and there are 54 sayings here of mainly sexual advice of women by the sages. And they're very hilarious. It's not as scary as doing the Old Testament, really. It's just very funny, actually. If I had more time, I would tell you about some of them, but I don't. Okay. My Wailing Wall. It's supposed to look like the Western Wall, but I call it my Wailing Wall. What I did was take out the pages, as it were, Xeroxed it, put on handmade paper, take it out, and put it on a wall. Out of the book format, it became a wall format. Hebrew on one side, English on the other side, and here's what it looks like in detail, so you see. Put grout around the edges. It does look like an ancient wall. Because this is the most important thing, and I hope we're going to talk about it, because women now, like Anat Hoffman at the Wailing Wall, they are trying to daven, they're trying to pray. They get slapped, they get pushed, they're not allowed to. Women's voices, here we go, about voices, are not heard. And so I really wanted to do a piece, even then, about the Western Wall. And here's another one, because in the Western Wall in Jerusalem, there's a partition. The partition is in place, but the service can't begin. Why? Because there may be maybe there are 1,000 women and maybe only 9 men, so the service can't begin. And, I'm winding down, actually. So I use that same image of the tzitzit, the threads. Actually here, I made them long as though my height, as though I could somehow be there, but not really. But I put them under the throne-like judicial chairs from All Rise, because one of the reasons for using tzitzit, religious garb for women, of men, is because of the lure of women to do something about it and be aware of that. So here are the pink dashes. Here the pillowcases are made into flags. They're flags now. And of course, you may have seen why I did this and how serious this is. We have women rabbis, we have women cantors, but we do not have women on a Beit Din. The Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Torah forbid women to judge or give evidence. I respectfully examine these edicts of Caro and Maimonides for false representations of God with words God did not say. I respectfully submit that God did not say that women and minors and idiots and slaves, an actual quote, among others, could not judge nor give testimony. So, so there's a petition for an apology, an abstentia, as it were, for all those judges who could not judge because they were not men. Their judgments will never be known. The final argument is simply to be able to say, Your Honor, to judges who are women. In so doing, all women will be honored, and the name of God will be honored. I did that in the year 5768, 3 years ago. This is just one of the images that's going around that show a complex we, feminism and identity. I came out of Borough Park, but Borough Park is still in me. And now, the very last thing, this is not part of the God Project. I don't know what it is, but I'm working now on images about, I had a very enormous illness, and I miraculously survived. And so this is my work, thinking about that. And then, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm Gail Reimer from the Jewish Women's Archive, and I'm really delighted to be moderating this conversation. Helene was part of an exhibit that we did online probably about 8 years ago on Jewish women in the feminist revolution. And she was one of the artists that was represented in that exhibition with something from the God Project. I think one thing that, I'm just going to jump in here and, you want to introduce yourself and then?
Well, I think they've
done enough to.
I'm Ayelet.
Okay.
Hi.
So, Helene, there seemed to be some kind of shift. I mean, you said fast forward, but I sat there saying, okay, so all of a sudden the work becomes much more obviously Jewish, and you're much more engaged with Jewish text and with Jewish ideas. And you talked about how those ideas informed your work earlier on, but you didn't need to know those ideas to respond to that early work, whereas in the later work it becomes much more significant. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit and how that happened.
I studied with Ed Reinhardt. I started college when my daughter started kindergarten, and he does these black paintings that turn blue-black or red-black as you stare at them, and it was about invisibility, and it was a very spiritual thing I felt looking at that, and I was very influenced in that, and I was wanting to do something that would teach me. I didn't think I was ready to. This takes a lot of chutzpah. I had to be at least 60 years old to even think of doing such a thing. And before, I really was, a girl from Borough Park coming into the art world, and it was sort of, not very hip to be doing Jewishy stuff.
Well, I just turned 60, so I feel maybe I'm ready to take that next leap. If we could pursue, though, that piece of the Jewish side of your art, or that interest in change. One of the things that's upstairs and that I saw the last time I was here at the museum is Soferet, who is writing a Torah. Right. So here you have the Torah that is where you're marking all the spaces that aren't there, or highlighting the absences, or both the problematic passages and
highlighting horizontally, and where a female presence is omitted, putting in that line, the pink line.
And now we feel excited about having a woman who is writing the Torah, which itself is a new thing. But she's writing the same Torah that has all the problems that you identified.
Indeed.
So, and maybe this is a question to both of you, that when we talk about a feminist court and feminist halacha, or what happens to the Beit Din when women start entering it, or if we had women judges, will that change the law, and how would it change the law? So let's start with Helene, maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's a rabbi, let me think, he's Orthodox too, and he wanted to have women rabbis and call it rabbah, and the Rabbinical Council of America forbid that, and he had to recapitulate. That was Avi Weiss, you may know about this rabbi. And I think that we just have to push for it, because the religious right in Jerusalem is so potent. And they're the ones who call all the shots. I mean, now there's a bill about kosher busing, where women would have to sit in the back of the bus, like in the Old South. There's the whole conversion bill, like who's Jewish, who's not Jewish, and Russians who came and they're serving in the army, but they're not religious, and so they're not considered. And that's another bill with Netanyahu, coming up, and etc.
So in this country, we've got women in high positions. Now have 3 women sitting on the Supreme Court. What difference does that make in the way that we see law being?
What's interesting, just hearing you talk about it first, I think that there's the hope, at least, right, from those who are currently in power, is that the the women on the court will act as the Soferet does. They will simply write the same law without any change. That there will be no female presence. It will just be simply a female body expressing the very same, I'm trying to avoid words like hegemony, but that's essentially what I'm saying. But if you take Helene and you bring her, if you take sort of the spirit of Helene into that, then you can imagine a situation where the existence of those women will be, instead of the Soferet on one side of the exhibit upstairs, they'll actually be the women rewriting and changing and inserting, filling those empty pink lines. I think that inevitably there is a change, just purely from the legalistic point of view. I think I tend to be of the opinion that every judge brings their own burden and blessing of who they are and where they're from and what their experience is to jurisprudence. And I as you were speaking and as I was listening before, I thought of this incident that happened when I was a criminal defense attorney before I became a writer. And I had a very ugly trial one day where there was a very good chance that I had a young illegal alien client and an undocumented worker who had participated in a drug deal, and it was a jury trial. It was going to be a jury trial in Orange County, California, which the Orange County of 15 years ago, as opposed to the Orange County of today, which is marginally more diverse. And I thought I could win. I thought I could get an acquittal. There was at least a chance, but there was also probably a 90% chance that I wouldn't, and this man would go to jail for 20 years. And at the very last minute, at 9 o'clock at night, I was offered a deal by the government that I didn't feel like we could say no to, and my client agreed. I convinced him to agree. The judge was a woman. She was called in to take the plea, and they demanded that the plea be taken right at that moment because they knew that if I had a chance to sleep on it, I might, gather up my courage and convince my client to gather his. So we placed the plea that night. And as there's a plea colloquy when an attorney is questioned after the client gives a plea, and you're asked by the judge whether you agree with the plea agreement, whether you have represented the client to the best of your ability. And I had worked this case so hard, and it was a fundamentally terribly unjust case. This man was borderline mentally retarded. He carried a box. He was looking at a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence. And I started to cry. And I gave my colloquy as if I weren't crying, but the whole time tears were rolling down my face. And then it was over, and it was dark, and I had my briefcase, and I walked out into the parking lot, and rolling out of the parking lot was a black Mercedes, and the window came down, and it was the judge. And she looked at me, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I'm fine." And she said, "Some cases are worth crying about." And then she drove away. Now, it's very possible that there would be a male judge appointed by Reagan in Orange County who would bring that same level of compassion. My male boss tried to get me fired for crying in court. So I think she took the same plea that a male judge, she was the Soferet in that case. But she also there was a glimmer of Helene's point of view there as well. There was a glimmer of a kind of acceptance of emotion that I think has, not exclusively, but has a more female impulse. So I think it's individual, but I think that we can, this is why we have diversity because of justice, and we have diversity because we hope that there will be a benefit that adheres to it. So,
in particular, the case of the Aguna, the chained woman, of course we need female judges there. I mean, the male judges very often have sided with the husband, and the husband had very often, I mean, not in all cases, of course, but in many cases, had blackmailed the woman. She was so desperate to get a divorce, and then he would, charge a lot of money and so on. So I can, and kosher busing. I mean, you have to have women there. They're going to feel it. They're going to have the angst.
And it's interesting, in the confirmation process for Sonia Sotomayor, what was the conversation? The conversation was Sotomayor trying to reassure the Senate that she would be a Soferet and nothing more.
Right.
And the subtext was them shouting, no, she thinks of herself as somehow different, she'll bring something else to the law, and we're afraid of that. But the subtext also from people like me, and dare I say maybe from you as well, was she'll bring something different, she'll bring something else, and that's why we want her. So, you know, the debate came on these different levels, and I think what was most curious to me was that what they are most afraid of, that we were so busy reassuring them would not happen, and by them I mean those in opposition to her appointment, was also at the same time what I, and I think many other people were desperately hoping would be the result of her appointment. And it remains to be seen.
Right, it's an interesting question. I mean, I hadn't even thought of it when I posed it a minute ago, but to imagine the Sopharet upstairs, like when she hits some of the passages that you've highlighted, deciding to leave them out, and what would happen if she did that?
Or rewriting them and more revolutionary, not just skipping them, but actually changing them. I mean, the scroll is polluted already from the point of view of the rabbinate in Israel. Certainly, that scroll that's right. You can't have a woman's hand touch the scroll. So, for many people, wouldn't that be considered a polluted scroll? So, if it's polluted already, well, why not just rewrite the whole damn thing?
Did you want to say something?
That's your next project, Helene.
You know, it's such a, I mean, we just have to break down, I mean, what was drummed into my head is the word Mida Oraisa, which means it's from God. And that makes everything sacred. And if you just finally have the courage to say, no, it wasn't from God, then you could deal with it. But I still have problems around it. I'm very nostalgic. I'm in love with Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very nostalgic also.
Right.
I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I don't know if it should be changed. But I think a lot should be left out somehow, and it's very hard to know.
And there are women in Israel. You know, you're talking about the women at the wall, and that beautiful piece, "My Wailing Wall," reminded me of this. Recently there has been a movement among extreme Orthodox women to veil as though they, in a way that is very reminiscent of women in Taliban place in Afghanistan. They're veiled head to toe. They're veiled with many, many layers, and it's almost like a competitive veiling. The more veiling you have, and the women's husbands went to the rabbinate and said, "Please stop our wives from veiling." So, and the women were. They were, to their mind, expressing this, one of the only areas of religion that was open to them to express, one of the only ways that they could show just how observant they were. But it became this phenomenon of the rabbi actually telling the women that banning them from engaging in this kind of extreme veiling, and telling them they had to dress in the modest way prescribed by the men, but not in the. It's actually, these are remarkable photographs. If you like, this is just this year. It's recently as a couple of months ago.
So I'm going to try to bring this into this country rather than. It's important to think about Israel. I think some of the issues there also have to do with the rabbinic court having jurisdiction over personal matters, which is its own kind of problem, and is not a feminist problem. It's a problem with how laws, how the legal system is set up in Israel, which I'm not sure we want to get into here. But what we all have been doing, and I think when we set up this event for today, not a great day for all of us. I don't think, both because it's nice outside, there are other things to be doing, but we purposely chose to hold this event and to think about Helene's piece, the particular piece that is upstairs, during the high holidays, at a moment in time where, and Helene has already mentioned this, the liturgy is so full of God as judge. Who shall live, who shall die? I actually copied one of the passages which struck me when I was in synagogue earlier this week from the Netana Tokef prayer, which is that central prayer about who shall live and who shall die, where the prayer describes God as judge and prosecutor, expert and witness, completing the indictment, bringing the case, enumerating the counts. I mean, God gets to do it all and is the judge, and this powerful image of this person who has control over our future in every kind of way. And we read that, and we read it constantly over the course of the high holidays, and it crescendos into the Neila service at the end of Yom Kippur. And yet at the same time, there's this other image of God that's in the liturgy of the God of compassion, the El Malei Rachamim, and their Rechem is, Rachamim comes from the Hebrew Rechem, which is womb, very much a feminine image of God. And I'm wondering if either of you could, or both of you, want to talk about, whether it's during the high holidays or any other time, how you reconcile those two notions of God, or why one speaks to you and one doesn't, and why, Helene, for example, why deal with Din and not just present that other aspect of God, the feminine aspect of God?
Well, the passage you're thinking of is Ad Hashem El Rachum V'Chanun Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Emet, God of mercy, full of compassion. Nosei Chesed La'alafim, He does mercy to thousands, but read on. Nosei Aval V'Fesh V'Chata'a V'Naseh, and then for generations, He will remember, like 7 generations down, He will remember the sins. So of course it's all negated then. This is how I'm trying to reconcile, because I have to be Jewish, I have to continue. But what can I do? Is that I look closely and see all the anonymous prayers, and I say that must have been from a woman. I look and I decided that I just do feminist Judaism. For example, there's nothing in the 5 books of Moses that says that you should light the candles on Friday night. A woman must have done that, must have thought of that, or maybe the women were huddled waiting for their men to come home from shul, and then one of them said, let's light a candle. Who knows? That's just one example. And all of these, there are so many things, the Havdalah, the whole thing about braiding the challah, braiding the Havdalah candle, all of these things that that feel feminine to me, I take a very good look at that. Mm-hmm. I think we have to say that we could teach this. My mother hated when I said this. It was the worst thing I ever said. The worst. I said, I know better than Moses. She said she couldn't stand it, and I said, because I have feminist consciousness. I said, it's okay. He lived in that time. He didn't have feminist consciousness. I excused him, but still.
Actually, you're in good company. Miriam also said she knew better than Moses.
Who said that?
Miriam. That's why she gets...
Oh, Miriam, his sister.
I mean, that's why she gets thrown out of the camp and gets leprosy. And,
it's so
right?
funny because, my mother is a feminist of the sort of 90s. She came to feminism in the 1970s, and she had to reject Judaism, she felt, because she found no place for herself there. And so much so that I remember when we were getting married, she said, and I married a man who was Jewish, and she said, why would you have a rabbi do this wedding? Why can't you get a nice judge? But then we are observant in our own way, but my own children have no sense of Judaism as a patriarchal religion. Why? Because they have only ever gone to services in Berkeley, and So when it says Moshe, it also says Miriam, and when it says Avraham, it also says Sarah, and they don't. And Hine matov u'manayim shevet kulanu gam yachad. It's not shevet achim. It's all been that feminist consciousness permeates Judaism for them. And sometimes I think they're going to go one day to services in I don't know Nebraska, and they're going to plot when they I would have perpetrated this fraud. God forbid they should try to go to services in Israel and see what.
Right. That's great. So I think that also raises the question: is it a success that your kids are able to pray in a context where they're not even aware of what the problematic is?
So far, so good. I mean, we're not even Shomer Shabbos. I mean, we do Friday night, and we do, so they have not had to confront it to that deep an extent. But yes, they have a sense of Judaism and religion that is as close to devoid of, I don't know that any of them have ever met a male rabbi. I'm trying to think. They know that the man who married us was a man. But, he was also the rabbi of the gay synagogue, so that... But it's their aunt is a cantor, and that's the only cantor they know. And they've never heard Kol Nidre sung by a man, ever in their lives.
Have they brought their grandmother back into this? Or?
God forbid.
Okay, so Ayelet, you mentioned that your mother's feminism led her to reject Judaism.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like you rejected the law, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your own
I'd rather talk
transition.
about, maybe we can, but that note, I love that note. That may be the best thing.
From
the
her
note
mother.
from your mother,
Oh,
the full page note from your mother. That's just the Jewish woman's lament. It's
I think we all have.
I've
like
got
that. I
a
have
pile
one
of
too. I was
emails
thinking
that look like that too. There was never been a forum in which she could write it publicly for.
Now, Ayelet,
But now she's going to have the idea.
your son was bar mitzvahed or what?
Yes, my son just had his bar mitzvah in the beginning of the summer.
And did he read from the Torah?
He did read from the Torah.
What was his parsha?
His parsha was Moses not being allowed to go into the land of Israel, which he wrote a beautiful drash available. I'll get it to you if you want, about Doctor Who. It's fascinating, not for this particular stage, but we could do a whole Dvar Torah on that, and he did.
But you're asking that question for a reason.
But when he studied that portion, the woman who prepared him for his bar mitzvah, they studied, Moses, and they studied Miriam, but the words he read were the words from the Torah.
Well,
so he read those
fortunate.
words.
I mean, he was fortunate
Absolutely.
that he got a good parsha. I mean, what if a boy is gay and he gets the abomination parsha?
Absolutely. That's, definitely. I mean, he also got parents who picked his parsha for him.
Oh.
There are a lot of dates. So, and he did too. He looked too. So he was more concerned with not having to memorize a list of things like, 7 bales of hay and all that stuff. So, but it's true. I mean, that would have been something that would have confronted him with a truth that he had not yet experienced in Judaism.
Right, so that even in Berkeley, it's possible to have to encounter these texts. I think that's what you're trying to say, that are problematic. One thing that, I'm going to go back to Israel for a second because, and this isn't just Israel, but also here. I guess you all got this sense of that this is a large project, the God Project, and it had, Helene said a little bit about the 9 houses that she talked about, and the different houses from which women were, or are still in many cases, excluded. One of them is, and you talked about this a bit, was the Beit Midrash, the house of study.
The kind of Beit Midrash that I know, those little places in Borough Park where the guys would sort of sit and chuckle in front of the stenda, and there were no women there.
Right. Now that's changing, right? And
it's still
what
in Borough Park.
Not in Borough. Well, but the women from Borough Park go to Manhattan and the Upper West Side, and they do the study. It's Orthodox women who are doing that kind of study. And what they're studying is, in fact, not Bible, not Oraita, but they're studying Talmud. And you had that one piece on Talmud that you said you've never shown, which I thought was also interesting, because that's where the halacha, that's where the courts are really, that's what the courts draw upon. And once women begin that study, can they be stopped, or will they really fundamentally have the knowledge to be able to change the halacha?
Yeah, but when you think of Sheva Brachas and how nice that is at a wedding, right? And then you go to the Talmud and it says, the groom shall, if he marries a virgin, he shall celebrate for 7 days. If he marries a widow or a divorcee, he shall celebrate for 3 days. So,
as you said, who wrote that, and who studied it, and who's created it, right?
So, I mean, if you're studying the Talmud and you get that, you get a lot of that. It's funny. It's ridiculous.
So, I guess I know we have to wrap up, and we want to open this up to you because I'm sure you have questions. But Helene, maybe you could say one word, because I think this kind of you still feel very steeped in this, not in the way that that Ayelet was talking about her mother. Your feminism has given you, obviously a very critical consciousness about this, but you love it, and you
critical
still
consciousness. Feminism gave me a critical consciousness.
Your feminism gave you a critical consciousness about what you had received, and yet you're not letting go of it. You're really struggling with or fighting to change it, with a real concern to make that change and not reject it.
Yeah, but I'm picking and choosing, and I'm looking for what women's input might have been, what the lost foremothers might have wanted.
And those lost foremothers also would include Hinda and your mother, and
yes, I'm asking the question,
Yeah. Why don't we open it up to? We don't have a lot of time, so raise your hands quickly.
Thank you. I just want to mention that today in Israel, the chairman of the Supreme Court is a woman, Dorit Beinish, and there is this distinguish between the rabbinical court or any other institutions and the government one. And it's important to mention that there are many voices in Israel, including a lot of reform synagogues. So my 9-year-old daughter, I took her for Rosh Hashanah for a first time in Palo Alto synagogue, and this is the first time she saw the mechitza.
So I think that's an important point about that the Supreme Court needs to be differentiated from the rabbinic courts. The problem in Israel is that it's the rabbinic courts that have jurisdiction over all personal matters.
Right.
Do you have to be Orthodox to be Jewish?
According to the religious right, pretty much so.
Why do you have to follow the religious right? You can follow the religious
They're the ones in charge in Israel. That's why this piece has to go to Israel. It's here in America, but All Rise has to go there. That's where it should be.
Well, I think, my guess is behind Peggy's question is why, and I think that you probably want to answer this, is why would people care? I mean, why can't agunot why do they need a get? Why don't they just go get married again?
You want to answer that?
Well, I mean, I think individually, sure, there are plenty of agunot who don't get a get, who outside of Israel, for example, or who consider themselves Jewish and are happy to go to their Reform synagogues and couldn't care less. I mean, I think, but I guess what I'm thinking is there's a deeper question of why bother even to engage in that debate? Why give quarter to those rules and that structure and the Beit Din, and why not just make your own Beit Din or rewrite your own scroll? And I think that is a question that people who think of themselves as observant in any religion that has a conservative superstructure have to decide. I mean, are you going to struggle to compel inclusion of women, or are you going to say, you know what, we don't need you, and we're going to form our own version? I mean, what I chose personally was to go to the synagogues in Berkeley, which have simply opted out of that superstructure. But it seems like, Helene, you are much more. It's more important because you said you have the nostalgia for the book itself, for the tradition itself, that it's more important to struggle within that and to try to change it from the inside.
I just want to break the rules because they're so. The D'Oraisa idea, the comings from God, I think we just have to break this. And one thing is to shrug it off and do that, go to Bolinas, go to Berkeley, go to all these nice places, sure. But, there's this fear of women, and I just think that, by inserting, having the chutzpah to insert ourselves, it breaks that rigidity. We have to. I think I have to do it. It's my task. I gave it to myself.
There's an organization called JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. And in some ways, they're doing some of the most exciting work in terms of making the sort of changes that Helene is talking about. Her work, I think, provokes us all because it's art as well as politics.
Yeah.
Their work, and I think this is also what Ayelet was saying, for people for whom this is a strong tradition, want to be able to change the tradition. There are other people who might say, the hell with the tradition, we'll create our own tradition, or we'll create our own way of doing things. But for some people, they want to push against the system. This is supposed to be halacha. Actually, the Hebrew word has something, it comes from a word that means walking, but also means change. So evolution. And that was always the understanding, that halakha, the law, is supposed to evolve. It's not supposed to be a static thing. We have this in America too. How do we interpret law? So for people who were inside the tradition, I think that's, and I think Helene is such a wonderful exemplar of that, where the struggle is part of what it's about. You don't throw out the baby with the baby water. I hate to use that metaphor, but it's some of it. Candace.
I first of all want to thank you all for a really stimulating conversation and for bringing up these issues, especially at this time. My vision is that your work, Helene, would become a model for across religions, so that there would be, at some moment in life, a Quran that could have yellow, pink, and and the various other, including Buddhist, and that it would be across religions, and that would be the most beautiful inspiration that your work could have in terms of not having this vision of God, sort of more a la the Beatles, imagine no religion, but the essence of what one wants it to be there.
Thank you.
Do I have to stand up? I live in Berkeley too, and it isn't like any place in the world. I have to say that I visited an Orthodox, this is just a comment, but I visited an Orthodox temple in Havana, right? And there are only 1,500 Jews in all of Cuba. But in Havana, the Orthodox temple has the separation. So we're talking about a socialist culture in which this old patriarchal ritual is still enacted. In every other way, women have made huge gains, especially in the last 10 years. It had been 10 years since I'd visited. And there are now women in all kinds of positions of power in the socialist government, but not in the religion, not in Judaism. So just as a comment to reinforce what you were talking about, there's nobody there working from within.
All right.
There must be more than one synagogue. Isn't it? Just two for 1,500 people? You'd think there'd be like 97. Each of them scrambling for a minyan.
Helene, I heard a different tone in your voice when you said, "I'm just in love with Judaism," and sitting in the back row and listening to you and knowing of your great passion and your activism. Could you talk to us about this love, because it has a different cadence and somehow a different meaning for you?
Did you
Talk
hear a
about
question?
what?
Your love for
Your
Judaism.
love for Judaism.
Okay. There's a prayer that we say very often. It's called Ashrei Yoshvei Beisecha Od Hallelujah Selah. It's fortunate are those who sit in the houses, Beitecha, God's houses, and we will yet praise you. And I'm thinking that, but the women do not sit in these 9 houses. But it says, Od Hallelujah Selah, we may still praise you. I mean, I just think that we have gained so much, and it's like a fact now. The liberation of God was horrifying at the beginning. The curator of the Jewish Museum was so afraid to do this. He got a rabbi to be co-curator, never did that before, because he was afraid of doing it. And that was like a big deal. It's a fact. Now, another thing, besides liberation of G-D, Judaism will never be the same after Sandy Dubofsky did Trembling Before G-D. Right? I mean, we just have to keep, doing this and just looking for the beauty and finding out, I don't know. There's a lot I don't know how to do it. I try, but I'm not sure how to really do it. It's a tremendous tragedy that women have been left out. And I hope I'll be a foremother someday.
You are already a
Good.
foremother.
That strikes me as a wonderful closing note.
And
Don't you think?
Jewish women's archives, and
Well, I
just
think
have to have
we
our
all
voices
understand that. Helene is a foremother, what she's done here, and I love what Candace said about, this could be a model for a much larger project to be done by others. If I could share something from the Jewish Women's Archive to close, I think I found it of interest. It occurred to me as I was thinking about today as being right between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but it also happens to be 15 years to the day that Bella Abzug delivered the plenary address to the 4th Women's Conference in Beijing. She was sick at the time. She was in a wheelchair, but she felt she really had to go because she saw this, that particular conference, which in fact created platforms for change around the world. How much change has happened is another question, but she really saw the possibilities and insisted on going. And I wanted to just share with you a little bit from that address, because I think in some ways Helene reminds me so much of Bella and Bella's passion and Bella's desire to change. Sorry, these are new glasses and I don't know how to read with them. We're bringing women into politics to change the nature of politics, to change the vision, to change the institutions. Women are not wedded to the policies of the past. We didn't craft them. They didn't let us. As women, we know that we must always find ways to change the process because the present institutions want to hold on to power and keep the status quo. And then she goes on and says, some wonder, and this I think speaks to that question of Helene's love of Judaism. Some wonder how I have kept going for so long and how I managed to remain optimistic. And then she lists all the things that have gone wrong that year. And she concludes, in the face of so much pain, I remain an incurable optimist. I'm fueled by the passion of the women I've been privileged to meet and work with, buoyed by their hope for peace, justice, and democracy. I am strengthened by each of them. I wish each of you well and sustainable optimism for the days ahead. Never underestimate the importance of what we are doing here, and I would say the importance of what Helene has done. Never hesitate to tell the truth, and never, ever give in or give up. Thank you, Helene.